Well, good morning, Forefront. It is so good to be with you guys this morning. Thanks for joining us this weekend for Church Online. I hope you guys are great. A little bit of rain outside. It's going to make the grass nice and green. The mountain's beautiful. So I hope you guys are having a great start to your Memorial Day weekend. If you have your Bibles, let's grab those. And let's open up to Matthew chapter 5 this morning. We've been spending the last month or so in the Sermon on the Mount in a series called Upside Down. And we've been seeing that Jesus tells us what it looks like to live right side up in an upside down world. And so we're going to continue this morning through our journey through the Beatitudes. I was reading an article this week in the Wall Street Journal about the 2004 Ukrainian election. If you know the story, it's a fascinating story. In 2004, the election is a really heated election. The current prime minister was running against a man by the name of Viktor Yushchenko. Viktor Yushchenko was a pro-Western candidate, was running against the current prime minister who was backed by Russia. And the election got so heated that Yushchenko was poisoned. Here's kind of a picture of what he looked like before, and I'll show you a picture here in a minute of what he looked like before and then after the poisoning. But when he was poisoned, he was firmly believed it was from the other side. And so it was this really heightened election. There was a lot going on there. And on election day, early poll results came back, and it said that Yushchenko was winning, that Yushchenko was ahead. So that night, as numbers were being tallied and things were coming in, the local TV station, which was a state-sponsored TV station, began to say that Yushchenko was defeated, even though he was ahead, by the current prime minister, to the point where that Putin in Russia, Vladimir Putin, even called the current prime minister to congratulate him on his win. And so there was it was such a heightened, crazy situation that basically the state TV came back and said, hey, no, Yushchenko did not win. Yushchenko did not win. The current prime minister won. And so there was just a lot of confusion. But there was something that state-sponsored TV station missed that night as they were reporting fake news, as they were trying to control the election. What they missed was that in this big screen full of state-sponsored reporters who were saying what they're told to say, in the corner was a sign language interpreter. And that sign language interpreter, her name was Natalie Dimitrick, and she took it upon herself to speak the truth. And so she conspired with her makeup artist, and she tied an orange ribbon on her wrist, which was the color of Yushchenko's campaign. And during her sign language time, she bared her wrist. And in sign language, she said, everything you have heard so far in the news is a total lie. Yushchenko is our true president. She says, goodbye. You'll probably never hear from me again. In the small corner of the big screen that day was a message of truth, countering the message of a lie. And that short message of hers started a firestorm. People who knew sign language understood what she said. They began to text their friends. They began to email. They began to call one another. And pandemonium began. People started filing out into the streets. Protests began. There was a protest actually out in front of the state-sponsored TV station. What ensued is what we know now as the Orange Revolution. The words, the sign language of this lady, this message in the corner of the screen sparked a revolution. Pressure was put on the state-sponsored TV station. Pressure was put on the government, and the vote was annulled. A revote was taken a month later, and guess what? Viktor Yushchenko won and became president of Ukraine. It's amazing that such a small message sent in a way that many people couldn't understand, sparked a revolution that changed the scope of a country. And it's interesting, if you think about it, in our lives, we see something very similar. The big screen message of our lives, of our world, in our society, in our culture, is telling us one message. And the message they're saying is that life is for the taking, that happiness is determined by how much you can get, that helping others is good as long as you don't put yourself in an adverse situation. But yet, in the corner of the screen and in the corner of the message that we hear is another message. communicated to us in another way. It's the message of Jesus. And this message is saying the opposite. It's saying, don't buy that one. This message of Jesus is saying that actually, if you want to be full, you need to pour yourself out. That if you want to be great, you need to put yourself last. Jesus says, if you want to be blessed, then help others, even if it costs you something. We've been, the past few weeks, looking at the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, and the word beatitude, it's a beautiful word. It means happy or blessed. And we see that in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus gives us 8 beatitudes, and these are the characteristics or virtues of the citizen of the kingdom of heaven. And these are a picture of what Jesus wants our life to look like. And so we've been saying, though, as you look at these Beatitudes, at first glance, they seem upside down. They don't seem like what the big screen of the world would tell us it means to be blessed or to be happy. Rather, it's the opposite. It's upside down, right? Jesus says, happy, blessed, beautiful is the person who's poor in spirit. Happy, blessed, beautiful is the person who mourns their sin. Happy, blessed, beautiful is the person who's meek, gentle, humble. Happy, blessed, beautiful is the person who is hungry and thirsty for righteousness, rather than all the other stuff. And I think what Jesus wants us to see today, as we look at these Beatitudes, is the way that we experience the true life, the true happiness that Jesus created for us, is to live life opposite of the world around us. And this is exactly what we're going to see today in the 5th Beatitude. So if you have your Bibles open to Matthew chapter 5, look with me. We're going to be in Matthew 5, verse 7 this morning. Matthew 5, verse 7. Jesus says this. He says, blessed are the merciful, happy, blessed, beautiful are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Happy, blessed, beautiful are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Now, mercy is an interesting word. It's a word that I think we've all heard many times, we've said. It's a word we're familiar with. It's a churchy sound of word, kind of a religious kind of word. But what does it really mean? I used to always think, maybe you're like this, maybe you and I are the same. I used to always think that mercy and grace were kind of the same thing. You know, I kind of maybe confused them a little bit, but there is a difference. And so you might say, well, what is the difference between grace and mercy? Well, I like simple definitions. I like easy to understand definitions. So here's kind of the way I would like to define it. I think this is a good way to say it. Grace, the definition of grace, is receiving something you did not earn. That's grace. But mercy is the opposite. Mercy is not receiving something that you deserve. So grace, I receive something I did not earn. Mercy is, I do not receive something that I deserve. But let's throw in a third term. How about justice? I think justice goes alongside it. Justice says you're getting what you deserve. When I was in college, I went out to dinner one night with a girl I was dating, and I decided I wanted to show her how cool I was. And so, that little sports car I told you about last week, I decided I was going to see how fast I could get that sports car with her in it, right? And I wanted to show off a little bit. So I was going about 80 and a 50 on Stadium Drive in Columbia, Missouri, if you know the road, and all of a sudden I see lights flashing behind me. Woo, 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 and my heart goes in my stomach. And I pull over, but I have to act cool, right? So I'm acting cool because I want to impress this lady. And so the police officer comes to the door, and I try to act tough, and he asks me for my license and registration, and I give it to him. And I'm thinking, man, I am in so much trouble. My dad's going to kill me going 80 and a 50. And so the police officer comes back to the door, and he says, hey, why don't you step out for a second? And I'm thinking, was I going faster than I thought it was? This isn't good. So we walk to the back of the car, and the police officer, he pulls me, he stops at the back of my car, and he says, hey, I noticed you're in there with your lady, and I understand you want to be cool. You're trying to act cool. I was once your age and know what you're doing. But let me be honest with you. If you get in a car wreck and everybody gets hurt, there's nothing cool about that. There's nothing cool at all about that. So why don't you actually be cool and be safe? And he let me off with a warning. And I remember I had a cat with my tail behind my legs. And I walked back to the car, and she's like, did you get a ticket? And I was like, no, actually, he let me off with a warning. See, the justice I deserved in that moment for being a dummy and going way too fast was a ticket and a court date. But the officer showed me mercy in that moment. See, the reality is, in life, we all want mercy. When we mess up, when we fall short, when we make mistakes, we want mercy. When life throws us a curveball, when we got lemons, right? We want mercy. It's natural. I think it's natural for us in those moments to want mercy. But I want us to see what Jesus is calling us to is not just to want mercy, but it's to show mercy, to deliver mercy. How many of you found yourself maybe it's late at night, you know you should go to bed, but you're just kind of just sitting there on the couch, and you pull out your phone, and you flip open social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and you just start scrolling. And you start scrolling. And the more you scroll, the more you see people around you are going through tough times. The more you find out about difficult situations and people that are sick and people that have lost loved ones, and the more you see bad news. And in that moment, while you're sitting there scrolling, you feel that tug in your heart, that feeling in the pit of your stomach, and it bothers you. So what do? In that moment, you throw up a little prayer for them. Maybe you send them a text, hey man, I'm praying for you. Or you send them a little emoji or whatever it is, just to let them know you're thinking about them. That emotion that you feel, that thing that you have felt is compassion. It's a good thing. Compassion is that feeling of sympathy or concern for the sufferings of the situations of others, the misfortunes of others. And compassion is a really good thing. Paul tells us this in Colossians 3, verse 12. He tells us to put on compassion. He says, put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, patience. Paul tells us that we need to actually put on compassion. So compassion is a really good thing, but I want you to notice specifically what Jesus says here in this beatitude. He says, blessed are the merciful. He doesn't say blessed are the compassionate. Compassion is a great thing, but Jesus is calling us to something, a step beyond, something that is just more than a feeling, as Boston sings. Jesus doesn't just say, blessed are you when you feel sympathy for somebody. Jesus is saying, blessed, happy, beautiful are you who show mercy when you feel sympathy for somebody. One day, Jesus was walking along to Jericho, and there was a crowd following him. And Jesus was walking along, and there was these two men that were sitting by the roadside. And Mark actually tells us that one of the guys' names was Bartimaeus. And as he went, there's this big crowd that's following Jesus, and these two men who were blind, the Bible tells us, were sitting by the roadside. And they cry out, they say, Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David. They say, Jesus, I hear that you can heal. I hear that you bring healing to people. You can give sight to the blind. Give me sight to the blind. Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David. And it says that the crowd told them to be quiet. The crowd rebuked them in that moment, and they cried out even more, Lord, have mercy. Jesus, have mercy on us. So Jesus stops, and he calls them, and he says to them, what do you want me to do for you? What is it that you're asking me to show you mercy for? And they say this. Verse 33, Matthew 20, verse 33, they said, let our eyes, Lord, let our eyes be opened. And look what Jesus did. Verse 34, Jesus in pity touched their eyes, and immediately they recovered their sight and followed him. Matthew says that these men were blind. They asked Jesus for mercy. They had a specific need they couldn't see. And Matthew tells us that Jesus had pity on them. Now, sometimes we hear the word pity, and we think of it in a negative connotation. We think, oh, that person is having a pity party or pity that person. But that's not pity. Pity is sympathy. Pity is showing concern over somebody in need, that feeling, that tug, that concern. Yet what makes mercy so powerful is what Jesus did. You take that feeling of sympathy or pity or concern and you put it into action. You actually do something about it. Jesus gave these men their sight back. So if you want a good definition of mercy, I think it's this. Maybe a great working definition. If you have a pen, write this down. Mercy is compassion in action. Mercy is taking that feeling of compassion that we have, that feeling of sympathy, of pity, that tug, and it's putting it into action. Mercy is having compassion for people in need. Mercy is going and meeting that need. It sees misery and it provides relief. It drives us to help. And this is why the life of Jesus was so radical, especially in the culture that he lived in. See, Jesus lived in a Roman culture where mercy was actually seen as weakness. That Rome was powerful. Their military was great because they didn't show mercy. And so mercy was weakness. Rome got power not because of being merciful, but because that they were strong and they took it by force. Yet, I want you to see this, that it wasn't power that changed the world. It was mercy. It's the mercy of Jesus. Some of you may know the name Rodney Stark. Rodney Stark is a sociologist and a professor at the University of Washington and in Baylor University. And Professor Stark was studying why Christianity grew the way it did. And he wanted to know, how could a religious movement in the early 30s AD with 120 people grow within 300 years, a few centuries, to become the predominant religion in the world? How did that happen? So he did some research and he wrote a book called The Rise of Christianity. And here is his conclusion. One of the reasons that Christians rose to such prominence was mercy. Stark says this. He says that the moral climate in which Christianity taught that mercy is one of the primary virtues is that a merciful God requires humans to be merciful. He says, moreover, because God loves humanity, Christians may not please God unless they love one another. And this was something entirely new. Here's what Stark concludes. He says, perhaps even more revolutionary was the principle that Christian love and charity must extend beyond the boundaries of family and tribe, that it must extend to all those who in every place call on the name of Jesus Christ. Indeed, love, charity must even extend beyond the Christian community. Did you catch that? Did you catch what Stark is saying? Stark is saying that one of the major reasons that Christianity became a world changer was because Christians saw that mercy, we were called to show mercy, not just to our friends, not just to our family, not just to our loved ones, not just to our coworkers, but to everybody. And that changed the world. And Jesus is telling you and me today in 2020, do you want to change the world? Then it's going to be through mercy. See, the reality is, it's easy for me to show mercy to you when I know you, when I love you, when I care about you, when I want to show you mercy. It's really hard when I'm going to do it to somebody else that I don't know, that doesn't look like me or talk like me or act like me or go to the same or believe like me. That's a lot harder. But Jesus is calling us to tear down those divides and show mercy to everybody who is in need. And that is why Jesus, in this message in the corner, has changed the world and started a revolution that has brought you and me to the place we are right now. So I think one of the questions we ask here is, what does mercy look like then? You're probably wondering, what does it look like? How do I show mercy? I feel compassion, I feel sympathy. How do I show mercy? Just a few months ago, Christmas 2019, there was a man by the name of Kirk Abbott, and Kirk was waiting at the subway in New York City. He was waiting on the subway to go to work, and he looks over and he sees a man get pushed into the subway tracks. A man actually gets pushed over onto, the man was later prosecuted for it, to the subway tracks. And so here is Abbott and a couple onlookers, and there's a train coming. So what are you going to do in that situation? So Abbott looks at the three other guys and says, hey, why don't you guys jump down in the tracks and help this man, and I'm going to go try to stop that train. So Abbott runs toward the tunnel, grabs his flashlight, good thing he had a flashlight, and he waves the train down. In time, the train actually stops. The subway train stops before it hits this man. The four men are able to bring the injured man who's in and out of consciousness back up onto the platform and saved his life. And these men have been hailed as good Samaritans. I think most of us know that term, good Samaritan. And when we hear a story like that, I think something jumps out at us. We think, wow, that's incredible. That's amazing. I can't believe that happened. But there's a reason those stories are so shocking to us. And I think part of the reason is this. We wonder, if that was me in that situation, would I have done it? If that was me in that moment, would I have jumped in and waved down that train? What would I have done? Would I be willing to help somebody that I don't even know? Maybe you remember the parable. Jesus one day was teaching, and the religious leaders in that time loved to challenge Jesus. They loved to ask Jesus, and try to catch him up. They wanted to trap him, to trick him. And so one of the days, Jesus is teaching, Luke chapter 10, and the lawyer, one of the religious leaders who knew the law, looked at Jesus and he says this. He says, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Trying to catch Jesus up. And so I love how Jesus turns it back around on him here. In Luke chapter 10, he says, "Well, what is written in the law?" He says, "How do you read it? What's your interpretation of the law?" So the lawyer says, "Well, you should love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength, with all of your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And so Jesus says, "Yeah, that's good. Go do that. Go do what you just said." But the lawyer didn't like that answer. He needed more specific. Words matter. So he looks at Jesus and he says, "Jesus, who is my neighbor?" Okay, Jesus, I'm supposed to love my neighbor. I'm supposed to love God. Then who is my neighbor? What am I supposed to do? I think we wonder the same question, don't we? Like, well, Jesus, you're calling me to be merciful, to show mercy to people. Tell me to love my neighbor. Well, who's my neighbor? Who do I show mercy to? When do I do it? How do I do it? Who is it? My friends? Is it the guy next door? Who really is my neighbor? So I love what Jesus does here. As he always does, he responds beautifully with the parable of the Good Samaritan. If you know it, Luke chapter 10, parable of the Good Samaritan. Jesus says, one day there's a man who's going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was robbed and beaten for dead. And this is nothing new in the story. The people in that crowd would have understood that Jericho was a bad place. The road to Jericho was a dangerous place, and if you went on your own, you could get beaten, you could get robbed, you could get killed, and so that makes sense. Well, then Jesus tells the rest of the story. He says, well, there was a priest that walks by, and he sees this man who's been beaten and robbed and left half dead, and he steps over him. Next, he goes to the other side of the road. Oh, okay. Well, what next? Well, then a Levite, a religious man, comes by, walks right by Jesus, or walks right by the man and goes on. Okay. Then Jesus gives the curveball to the parable. He says here that next was a Samaritan. And the Samaritans, if you know much about Jewish history, were the enemies of the Jews. The Samaritans and the Jews hated each other. Because of years of racial and religious hatred, they couldn't stand each other. And so Jesus throws this story for a loop and says, here comes the Samaritan, a man who's hated by the Jews. And this is a Jewish man who's laying in the ditch, and chances are the Jewish man probably wouldn't want the Samaritan to help him either. But he does. Jesus says the Samaritan picks him up, bandages his wounds, takes him to the inn, and even leaves his credit card with the innkeeper. And says, I'm going to come back and take care of his bill. This is a shocking story. The Samaritan twist is shocking. And so Jesus gives this parable, and he looks back at that lawyer, and he says, okay, lawyer, trying to trip me up. Let me ask you a question. Which one of these three men showed mercy? Which one of these three men proved to be a good neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And the lawyer, he doesn't want to say the Samaritan, because that would be bad for his image. So he says, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus says, okay, then you go and do the same. Jesus says to us, Luke 10, verse 37, you go and do likewise. The Samaritan and that Jewish man had nothing in common. They hated each other, but yet he was the one that showed mercy. Do you see what Jesus is telling us here about mercy? He's saying that mercy is more than just having compassion. Mercy is more than just having a feeling. Mercy is seeing a need and then going and meeting it. Mercy is meeting that need even when it has a great cost to you. Even when it hurts. Even when it takes something away. See, I think often that's one of the reasons that we choose not to step in, and we choose to stop at compassion and not show mercy. It's the cost. We count the cost. We always count the cost. But what Jesus wants us to do is he wants to bring us to a crossroads between action and attitude. He wants to challenge us from doing things for the sake of just doing them to challenging our attitudes for why we do them. And he wants us to see that we don't just show mercy because we want to show mercy. We show mercy because people need to see and experience mercy. That Jesus called us to be merciful people. I think most of us would agree that when we see a difficult situation, even if we like the person or we don't like the person, we don't even know the person, it bothers us, right? It's difficult to hear. Our heart goes out to that person. We maybe feel the tug to do something, but then we count the cost. What's it going to cost me to do something? Jesus says, stop counting the cost. But here's the question we run into, though. We feel this tug, but what do we do? How do we do it? And how much is it going to cost? See, the reality is sometimes people need mercy because of things that happen outside of their control. Health, financial, life situations. This pandemic we're in right now, COVID-19, it's outside of our control. Like the guy who was beaten on the way to Jericho, like the man who fell on the subway rails, that's out of their control. But other times, people need mercy because of problems they got themselves into because of their own sin, because of their own bad decisions. And it's in those situations that I think it's easy for us to count the cost. It's in those situations where it's really easy for us to think, well, you made your bed, now lie in it. You get what comes around. You deserve what you get. And this is why what Jesus says here for us is so big and we can't miss it. Because this is why the challenge Jesus gives us is countercultural from the message on the big screen of the world. Because this is not about whether someone deserves mercy or not. Jesus doesn't say, blessed are those who are merciful if that person deserves mercy. This isn't about what led to the hardship. See, it's easy for us to say, well, you shouldn't have been walking to Jericho by yourself, man. Why would you do that? It's easy to say, well, you shouldn't have been standing by the subway rail that close. It's easy to say, well, you shouldn't have been racking up that much credit card debt. Or you shouldn't have been flirting with that person at work. Or you shouldn't have been doing this situation or that. But here's what Jesus wants us to see, that the question isn't, does this person deserve our help? Did this person deserve mercy? The question is, does this person need mercy? Does this person need help? Just ask yourself, has there ever been a time in your life when someone showed you mercy or compassion after you messed up? Has there ever been a time when you did something dumb or sinful or got pulled over way too fast and somebody showed you mercy? Somebody stepped in that moment and gave you mercy. I guarantee there has been. And so here's the truth I don't want us to miss. You will never show mercy until you know mercy. You have to know mercy before you can show mercy. You see, it takes knowing mercy before I'll see that mercy is something that I can show somebody else. Because unless I realize that I've been shown mercy myself, I'm always going to see the world through tainted lenses. I'm always going to count the cost. I have to see first that I've been given mercy. And this is why Jesus tells us, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy, because I have to have my heart changed first to see the need to step in. But when I realize that that my heart has been changed, that Jesus has shown me mercy, I'm motivated, I'm driven, I'm pushed to go and show it to somebody else. Years ago, I used to work with a guy named Roy. Roy was one of the nicest guys I've ever met in my life. He spent his time serving kids with special needs, and he worked specifically with children that had severe special needs, severely disabled, and it was heartbreaking. If you would spend time around these children, you would see that many of them weren't able to speak, or they were being fed through a tube, or they would be in a wheelchair. It just heartbreaking. You would spend time around these children, and your heart would go out, and you would just feel compassion and sympathy. But for Roy, his life was given to serving these kids. He drove a special needs vehicle. He volunteered all of his time at special needs events. He poured his heart out every single day to these kids with severe special needs. And I just, when I met Roy, I thought, wow, this is an amazing guy. He had compassion for these kids. He had compassion that led to action. But as I got to know Roy, I found out that Roy had a child with special needs. And it was through that experience of seeing a need that he decided, he knew that he was called to go and to meet that need. And he gave his life to it. Jesus is telling us that when we see that our needs have been met, that it's time for us to step outside of the barrier and go meet the needs of others. That this is what it looks like to live upside down. This is what it looks like to live out Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, to be different than the world, to step out and to pour ourselves out even when there's a cost. See, Jesus doesn't just tell us to be merciful and walk away. He came and showed us mercy. See, Jesus gives us this great parable of the Good Samaritan to give us a picture of himself. The man that came that was hated and despised, that nobody wanted. Yet, that's Jesus. Yet, he was the one that came at great cost to himself to rescue you, to mend your brokenness, to meet you where you had a need. And he took you to be healed, and he leaves his credit card. He says, I'll pay the cost, whatever it costs for you. He came to show us mercy. And then he tells us, when we can realize that, when we can see it and understand it and feel it, and it's that point when we know mercy, then we can go and show mercy. See, Jesus is calling us to something bigger than we can ever imagine here. Something greater than we could ever anticipate. But we first have to see it and catch it before we can show it. If you're like me, you'll probably go home later on today, flip on your phone, maybe turn on the TV, talk to a friend, and in that moment, you'll experience what we're talking about here, compassion. You'll hear of a need, and it's going to tug at your heart. And I think one of the questions that you're probably asking right now, I know I am, is there's so much need in this world. There's so many problems around me. What do I do about it? I can't help everybody. And the reality is you can't. It's impossible. You can't. But don't let that reality cause you to say that you're not going to help anybody. Don't let that reality cause you to say that you're just going to focus on yourself, because just because you can't help everybody doesn't give you a free pass to not help anybody. Jesus is calling us to something bigger and better. So what do we do about it? How do we do this? Jesus, what are you telling us? What do we do? How do we show mercy? Well, here's a good rule of thumb. I think it's a good rule of thumb. It's a principle for life. Do for one what you wish you could do for all. You can't solve every problem. You can't feed every person who's hungry. You can't foster every child. You can't fight sex trafficking in every country. You can't stand up for racial reconciliation in all situations. You can't speak out about pro-life movements in every moment. But you know what you can do? You can do one or two of them. You can't do them all, but you can do one. You can't feed everybody that's suffering right now from COVID-19. You can't take care of everybody right now who's dealing with economic downturns. But you know what you can do is you can help one. Or even if that's tough, which it is right now, you can team up with somebody else to help a family together. So maybe today Jesus is calling you to step out, to take that tug, that feeling of compassion in your heart, and to take it to the next level, to step out and show mercy. Maybe you hear this and you think immediately of a family member, or of a friend, or of a coworker, or of somebody across the street, or of somebody that somebody else has told you about, and you say, that person needs help. And I'm going to do what I can to show them mercy and help them. Who do you know that needs help right now? Who do you know that's lonely and needs a friend right now? Who do you know that needs to get back on their feet right now? I think we all know somebody. Rewind back to 2012. As the Syrian civil war took aim, the Syrian government began dropping bombs on homes and neighborhoods outside of their control. And there became this growing fear of residents in those neighborhoods that these bombs would hit their building and they would be buried alive under the rubble. And unfortunately, that became a reality. Tens of thousands of Syrians died when their buildings were blown up and they were trapped under the bricks and the stones. So shortly after, over the next 2 years, volunteer rescue crews began to form to provide urban search and rescue teams. And these teams came together to go and dig families out of the rubble when houses were bombed. And these rescue teams became one group and took on the name the White Helmets. Some of you may have heard of the Syrian White Helmets. Their job was to run in when a bomb goes off and to dig families out of the stones and the rubble and the bricks and the mess, to find people who were trapped and to save lives. And here's what's amazing. In the past 5 years, the White Helmets have saved more than 100,000 lives. 100,000 lives that they've dug out of the bricks. But it's been a great cost to them. Over 250 of the White Helmets have given their lives to this. That is mercy. See, here's the reality I want us to see today as we wrap up our time. Jesus ran into the war zone to dig us out of the bricks, to show us mercy at the greatest cost, at the cost of his life. And he says that when you come to know this, when you come to see this, when it takes root in your heart, it's going to change your life too. And what Jesus wants us to see is because he ran in for us, he's calling you and me to run into the war zone and dig others out as well. To be the merciful who show the same love we've been shown to others. Jesus says, happy, blessed, and beautiful is the person who shows mercy, because that means that that person knows mercy. Forefront, I pray that we can become those people. Let's pray together.